Are you looking for an evergreen plant that takes the full sun, requires no winter protection in most places? It will give you one of the most amazing looking flowers you have ever seen in your life. And on top of all that, we'll also give you fruits. Very tasty fruits. Well, look no farther, because in today's episode, I'm going to be giving you growing tips on how to grow your own pineapple guava, also known as Feijoa or Feijoa. So let's go ahead and get started. If you're not familiar with this plant, well, guess what? It's a subtropical plant, meaning it will actually handle colder temperatures than truly tropical plants. This is an evergreen bush that you can grow anywhere where the soil doesn't freeze. And like I said earlier, it will give you one of the most amazing flowers that you have ever seen in your life. And one of the cool things about it is you can eat the petals. You can pick the white petals right there and you can eat those, and they taste very sweet. This is my plant right here. It has been in the ground for a little over 3 years. And with that said, let's go ahead and get started with the growing tips. Sun requirements. This plant takes full sun anywhere in the United States. Will it grow in the shade? Yes. If you keep your plants in the containers, they do okay in the shade. But I've noticed in the shade, they don't flower as much. As you can see, mine over here are too shaded, and compared to the one in the ground that's getting direct sunlight, they're not flowering as much as the one in the ground. So if possible, give it full sun, even if you live in areas with extreme temperatures like I do in the desert. Full sun all day. One thing to keep in mind though, the first summer you have it in the ground, your leaves are going to sunburn, especially if the nursery you bought it from did not acclimate their plants or they kept them in the shade. That is normal. The sun will not kill your plant. It's only cosmetic damage, and as soon as your plant is rooted in the ground, it will take the sun without any damage at all. Winter protection. Alright guys, this plant right here, every single plant you see in the container has taken 19-degree ambient temperature. When they were little guys like this, about 3-4 years ago, I don't remember the last time we got that cold. And they took frost on top of all that. They have frost on top of the plants. I'm talking about 19 degrees Fahrenheit, sustained for 12 hours straight. That's cold. It was so cold the hose bibs around my house froze. But guess what? None of these plants right here took damage. They made it. So you should be able to grow this plant anywhere where the soil does not freeze. The only time you're going to have issues growing this plant is going to be if it gets so cold in your area for so long where your soil actually freezes. At that point, this plant I don't think will make it in your area. But if you have that problem and you still want to plant it in the ground, I guess you can put mulch in the ground, or you can create a microclimate where the soil is not going to freeze, and you should be able to grow this plant in your area. And that brings us to the root system. This plant right here has a shallow fibrous root system. Yes, you can plant it close to structures. You shouldn't have any issues. But even though it has a shallow fibrous root system that is non-invasive, you still have to use common sense when planting in the ground. You see the roots right here? They're really tiny. They're coming down the bottom of the container. This is the type of roots that this plant has. They don't have to force to uplift your walls, push your foundation, but guess what? If you have a water pipe right underneath it, a mature plant, definitely those roots are going to get in your pipes. So with that said, keep them away from your plumbing, especially around pools. Tree structure. Okay, naturally these plants are going to be bushes. Yes, you're going to get a lot of suckers from the ground up, and this plant is going to bush out, just like the one that I have here in the ground. This plant, like I said, is a little over 3 years old. I have not pruned it. I have not done anything to it. And it has grown naturally the way it wants to grow, and that is a bush. This plant right now, it's about, I would say, 7 feet tall and about 8 to 10 feet wide. And like I said, I have not done anything to it. Now, you can also grow it as a tree. But my recommendation is, if you're buying a plant, start with one that is smaller, or one that has already been pruned as a tree. And what you're looking for is one that has a single trunk. So if you want your plant to be a tree with a single trunk, and you're planning on pruning it for the next few years until it stops growing suckers on the bottom like this one, you find a plant that looks like this. It will make it easy for you to start with, and all you gotta do is just prune all this off and keep these as the main trunk. It will keep trying to sucker, meaning it will still push branches below the areas where you prune it. But you got to keep pruning for the next few years, and eventually once it gets older, it will stop growing branches on the bottom. This is a lot easier to start with if you want a tree compared to something like this over here that has tons of branches everywhere. So what's the trade-off? It's personal choice. But remember, the more branches you have, the more flowers you're gonna get, and obviously the more fruits. Let's talk about pollination. Now, this is gonna be the most controversial tip that you're gonna find out there, because if you start doing research about this plant, you're gonna find all kinds of stuff out there. I'm gonna tell you what I've noticed from experience, not what I read online, not what somebody told me, actual experience. Now, these flowers, they have male and female parts on the flowers themselves. For the longest time, I was not paying attention, and actually I thought this plant over here required a male and a female separately. But looking through pictures in the past and actually paying attention to the plants this year and looking at the flowers, I've noticed that all the flowers have the male and female parts on them. There's no variations, including the one in the ground and all the ones in the containers that I have. But one thing that I've noticed is my plant has been in the ground for a little over 3 years, and not once has it ever set fruit. Another thing that I've noticed is the bees are supposed to be pollinating this thing. I got bees everywhere, but the bees are not touching this plant. I don't know why. So that's one problem that I have, is that this plant needs a pollinator, but I don't even see the hummingbirds hanging out here. So I see some flies in there, but you know, that's not doing the trick. But what you actually need is, you need a cross pollinator. So if you have a pineapple guava and you're watching this video like mine, and you had it for a few years and you're not having any fruits, well, guess what? You're gonna need another variety. If you read online, they're gonna tell you there are some varieties that are self-pollinating, meaning that you only need one plant to get fruit. When we first started this, we used to get our plants from a wholesaler that were supposed to be self-pollinating, and they all turned out not to be. So we stopped selling them, and we actually started growing our own, because it makes no sense buying plants when somebody tells you they're one thing and you actually get another. So if you have one, keep in mind, it's always best to have more than one in the ground, so that way they can cross-pollinate. That way you can have fruits. Mine in the ground has been in the ground, like I said, over 3 years, and I haven't had any fruits. So what I'm doing this year is I'm gonna go ahead and get the pollen from the ones in the containers over there. I'm gonna bring it over here, I'm gonna hand pollinate it, and I'll make an update video and let you guys know what the deal is. Let's talk about flowering and fruiting. Since now you know you need a different variety, it doesn't have to be a different variety. I think in general, if you have other varieties flowering at the same time nearby, you should be able to get fruits. But normally these plants flower sometime in the spring, depending on the night temperatures. My night temperatures finally have been in the 60s consistently, so they just started flowering. The one in the ground, like I said, it's getting full sun over there, so that one started flowering earlier than this guys right here that are a little too shaded. And the fruits normally take a few months to ripen, and usually by late summer, that's when you actually have fruits. Watering. Okay, so if you're planting a container, let's talk about watering. In containers, you just follow the 50% rule. That is, you wet your plant completely 100%, then you wait until 50% of the container is dry, and however long it took to go from wet to 50% dry, that's exactly how often you water your plants in containers. And that tip will work on most plants out there, regardless of the size container your plant is in. Like this guys right now, that's happening twice a day. And my day temperatures are right now, I would say, in the low hundreds. As it gets hotter, this can happen up to 4 times a day. Now these plants are root bound. As your plants get root bound, they will dry even faster. So I need to up pot this guy, so because this summer they will dry even faster. But that's not an issue for me because it's an automatic watering. But if you are hand watering this plant and you miss watering, guess what? You will lose the canopy in a matter of hours. Now if your plant is in the ground, like this one right here, this one, you gotta shallow water. I have another video coming up soon on how to shallow water your plants, but to be honest, you just water as long as it takes to wet the soil, maybe 1 to 2 feet, and that should be more than enough for any of your shallow rooted plants out there. Like this one right here, let me show you what kind of dripper I use. I use this one right here. This one puts out 13 gallons of water an hour, and This plant right now is getting 1 hour every single day. How did I come up with that? Well, I was going every few days, but then my leaves started wilting, and then this plant in the past started dropping its flowers like a lot all at once. So that's a sign that the plant's not getting enough water. So right now, 13 gallons once a day in my soil, in my temperatures, in this spot right here is good enough. The good thing about plants that have shallow roots is it's extremely hard to overwater them, as long as you make sure before you plant your tree in the ground that your soil drains the water within 24 hours. If you want to learn more about drainage, I got another video you can check all about drainage. That brings us to fertilization. Do you need to use anything specific to fertilize your plants in the ground? In the ground, guys, to be honest, I have not done anything to this plant in many years. The plant's still growing, flowering, and hopefully this year I'll get some fruits after I cross-pollinated and hand-pollinated, since the bees are slacking like every single year, especially for this plant. Like, I got one bee right here. That's the first one I've seen in a long time. But anyways, yeah, I don't do anything to fertilize this plant in the ground. So to be honest, water is going to be more important. So get your water down, and then your plant's going to grow. If you really want to do something, you can use organic material like compost or anything else, and you can just put it on the surface. In containers, we use a slow release fertilizer, and we do that once a year, and the plants are good to go for the entire year. Container growing, guys. If you want to grow your pineapple guava in a container, it's very easy to do. And the only requirements for long-term growing in containers is your plant has to have a shallow root system, like the pineapple guava. So these plants grow slow, so they do okay in containers. These guys you see in these containers right here, they are a little over 2 years old. And you can see the root bound, but you know, they lasted that long in a container, so it's no big deal. The next size up that we're gonna put them in is, we're gonna go ahead and put them in 15 gallons like this size right here, and they will last easily another 2 to 3 years there. At that point, you're gonna have to go bigger, or you can root prune and prune the canopies, and you can keep it in the same container, but you're gonna have to do that every year. These plants grow slow, so you can keep them in containers, and they flower and they fruit in the right conditions. You just gotta make sure that you water your plants, because in containers it's gonna be very easy for you to miss watering, and your plant will take massive damage in one single day, especially if you live in an area like I do with extreme temperatures. That's it. This plant's evergreen. It fruits, super easy to grow, gives you amazing looking flowers. You can eat the petals, they're very sweet, and they give you delicious fruits as well. Like I said, the best part about it is evergreen. Now that brings us to my personal growing tips. This plant will take at least 1 year in the ground to root itself in the ground or in the container. In the containers happens a little faster before it starts to grow. So my plant in the ground, it took about 1.5 years because I was watering by hand, and it went dry on me several times during the rooting process. That will delay the rooting process time. And while your plants are rooting in the ground, it's not going to grow. So that's why I always say most plants take at least 1 year in the ground to root themselves, and then they will start to grow. And tip number 2 is, if you have a plant and it's not fruiting, most likely you need a cross-pollinator. So just get another plant, plant it close by somewhere, and then hopefully you will get some fruits. Another thing that I forgot to mention earlier is the flowers. When they open in full sun, even though the plant will take 120-degree full sun, no issues, the flowers will not. And this plant tends to flower when the temperatures are super hot. So it's been cooler than normal lately. So that's why a lot of my flowers are still hanging there. On a regular year, when my flowers open up, it's super hot, 100 degrees every single day, non-stop, and then they tend to sunburn and then they drop. So that means no fruits for you. So even though the plant takes full sun, your flowers will not take full sun in extreme temperatures. In mild temperatures where you have humidity in the air, you shouldn't have any issues with full sun. But anyways, guys, those are my personal tips, and those were my growing tips for the pineapple guava. So if you're looking for a subtropical plant that's super easy to grow, well, stop by sometime and you can go ahead and pick one up. I will also have smaller ones for sale on my website soon, and you can go ahead and check the link in the description to see if they're available for sale or not. Anyways, guys, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and I will see you next time.